Hello, this is a presentation about types of business correspondence, and we're going to cover letters, memos, and emails, and some of the differences and continuities among these types of correspondence. First, we have to define correspondence. There are three definitions. Only one of them has to do with writing. The others have to do with agreement and similarity, just in general. Correspond, to respond together, to respond with. In writing, correspondence is communication usually to specific people, to and from specific people by exchange of letters, emails, or other forms of writing. Or the messages sent or received by that communication. So it can refer to the act of communication or to the messages themselves. But correspondence involves a kind of agreement, and the genres of correspondence, in this case letters, memos, and emails, have certain similarities or agreements among themselves. So we say that there are three types of correspondence: letters, memos, and emails, but each one of those can have both a physical and a digital form, even emails. First, letters. Letters are the oldest and most traditional form of correspondence, but probably few of you have recently sent a letter that you had to write and stamp and mail. Not even a job application letter. Most of the time, what we get are digital mock-ups of physical letters, even for things like job applications. Memos are sometimes sent digitally, sometimes sent physically, and we will get into the reasons for why that's the case. Emails, of course, are natively a digital electronic form, but sometimes, as in legal situations, people want to print out emails so they can have a physical existence and have a reason for existing physically as well. So let's take a look at a letter. In this case, a letter that I've made up. I've taken the text from the homepage of the Department of English and put it on a coastal letterhead. So the first thing to note about a letter is that it has the address of the person who is sending the letter, or some identification of that person. In this case, the Department of English at Coastal Carolina University is at the top, and there'll be something else somewhere else, like a post office box, but that's at least what you have, some sense of who's sending the letter. A letter also has a date with the month written out, not with the numbers. Not 9/1/2016, but September 1st, 2016, because 9/1 is September 1st in America, but everywhere else in the world it's January 9th. So to avoid any ambiguity, we write out the month, and your book talks about this in the chapter on correctness, or on the 7 C's, excuse me. Then you have the name and address of the person receiving the letter, in this case, a Joan Doe. And then you have what's called a salutation, which is the Dear Ms. Doe. Notice two things about this. It has a colon, not a comma, after the salutation. That's standard in business writing. And in this case, it has a Ms. We don't say Mrs. or Miss ever. You say Mr. or Ms. or Doctor or Professor or Senator or whoever. But marital status has nothing to do with the salutation of a person in correspondence. If you don't know the gender of the person you are corresponding with, such as, for example, if the name is ambiguous, like, I don't know, Chris, or it is a name you don't recognize, for example, a foreign name that you're not sure whether it's a name typically taken by a male or female, then you write out the whole name. In this case, if this was to Chris Doe and you didn't know whether Chris was male or female, you would say Dear Chris Doe instead of Dear Ms. Doe. But you never use Mrs. or Miss in business correspondence. The letter ends with a close that involves the word sincerely, usually in business correspondence, and some space for a signature. Now, I haven't signed this because these words are from Dan Albergati, my chair in the Department of English. But if I were writing my own letter and signing it, let's say I were writing a letter that I wanted to send digitally, would I scan it and sign it? Or that is to say, sign it and then scan the signed version and send that? No, actually, I have scanned my signature, and I have a scanned file of my signature that I attach to electronic letters if I need to. So I never need to print them out and then sign them and scan them again. I just attach the signature to the electronic letter, flatten the PDF, and send it that way. Here is a memo, and it's not a perfect memo, but it's a memo I made up involving some damages to a company after a party. And you'll notice that it has a couple of things that a letter doesn't have, but it also is missing some things that a letter typically does have. So it doesn't have addresses, it doesn't have a salutation, and it doesn't have a close or a signature. Instead, it has headings, typically to, from, date, and subject. Again, the date is written out. Usually there's a line between the headings and the main text. An email, in this case, an email that you probably got earlier today, that I certainly got, it went to all faculty and staff, is an advisory to students about the tropical storm coming down. You'll notice a couple of things. First, as you see from the big X, the advisory is misspelled. The word advisory is missing an R. That is the subject line. And the second thing I want you to notice about an email is that an email looks exactly like a memo in terms of its form. Above the main text, it has a to, a from, a date, and a subject. Now in this case they're in different order, and in this case the application that is used to produce the email puts the date in numerical form rather than writing out the month. But the email descends from the form of the memo. When I was your age, I wrote memos and not emails because they didn't have email, at least in wide use, in the early 80s. So we sent memos within a company. Now we use email, but email descends from letters. I would say that it would be better to call email e-memo or e-memos, because the form of the email is taken directly from the memo. So it has a to, a from, a subject, and a date. And those will be in different order depending on the program that you're using, just as the order of the heading items in a physical memo will be different depending on what company you're working for. Some companies prefer to have the date after the subject, and some to have the date before. So, just to summarize the formal differences between letters and memos and their twin form emails. Letters contain the full sender address and a full recipient address. They have the salutation, which is a dear name followed by a colon, and they have a closing, sincerely, and they have a signature. Memos and emails do not contain addresses, do not contain a salutation, and do not contain a signature. If you include addresses or a salutation or a signature in a memo, I will say, no, you're writing a letter. That's not part of the memo form. Memos instead have to, from, date, and subject lines. Well, why does this matter? This matters because memos and emails actually feel a bit different from letters. That is to say, memos especially feel a little bit different from letters. Emails are different because they can serve both purposes. But if you look at the memo and the letter and you ask, well, what's the difference between them? The difference is who gets them. So a letter is sent outside an organization from somebody inside an organization, or maybe just from a person to somebody inside an organization, but they are not internal. They are external documents. So when you apply for a job, you send an application letter, not an application memo, unless you're already working at the company. But even then, you kind of act like you're outside the company, so you send a letter. Memos tend to be formal, and they tend to involve relationship building because the people who send and receive letters don't know each other as well as people within an organization. So they have a lot of politeness about them, and they have a kind of intention to cement or solidify or sometimes break off a relationship, but they mainly are involved in building relationship and building trust and goodwill, and they don't have the organizational structure to support them beforehand. Memos, on the other hand, are always sent within an organization. So if I send something to this class, that could be a memo form because the class is a kind of organization. If my dean sends something to all the faculty in the College of Arts and Humanities, then the dean's correspondence is probably going to be in the form of a memo. Also, memos can have a kind of assumed knowledge among the people because everybody in the college knows what the abbreviations that people use are, or sometimes who the people are. So, for example, when I get memos to people in my college, they routinely refer to the Edwards College, or EHFA, which stands for the Edwards College of Humanities and Fine Arts. If you were writing a letter to people outside the college, maybe to potential students or to parents of potential students or to potential donors or something like that, you would never use EHFA. You would have to write out the Thomas W. and Robin W. Edwards College of Humanities and Fine Arts. Memos can have an informality or at least a kind of insider knowledge that's assumed because everybody's in the same organization and has some of the same tacit knowledge. And they tend to be focused on policy, action items, getting things done, rather than on relationships. Now, emails, as I said, tend to have the characteristics of a memo formally, but we nowadays use emails to accomplish the purposes that we would use previously. We would use a letter for. So the question of how to write an email, maybe one way to answer it would be to ask yourself, if I were writing this as a physical document, would it be a letter or would it be a memo? And that will help determine how formal or informal or how much insider jargon you can use and so forth. Increasingly, as we move toward a digital form for the kind of native environment of documents, we assume that emails will take over not only from memos, which they've increasingly done, but from letters as well. Yet still, letters and memos serve different purposes because they are sent to different audiences and have different goals. The main difference between them, and the main thing that drives the differences in form, has to do with whether they are sent within an organization or outside an organization. In a technical writing class, we focus a lot on memos. In this class, we're doing one memo, but then a couple of letters, because letters are more germane to business communication. All right, thanks, and I hope this was helpful.